Hello YouTube, this is Jay here, and this is my 12-gallon planted aquarium. And the battle against algae is still going on. The tank has a significant infestation with algae. And what I've done here is I've taken out the floating plant so you can actually see the entire tank a bit better. So basically it has stabilized. It's more or less at the same state I left it a week prior. So not much has changed in terms of the algae. The plants have grown a bit more, but the algae is more or less stable. So if I left it like this for a couple of months, it may start improving, but that is going to take a long time. So what I planned for this week, if I didn't see any significant changes, was to escalate the treatment. So I tried doing some conservative methods, which was just adding more plant biomass to combat the algae, and that has achieved just some sort of an equilibrium where the algae isn't growing anymore, but it's not really going away. So I will be trying more radical treatments. So what I planned for this week was to start using some hydrogen peroxide and Flourish XL. So I was going to dose those things. Unfortunately, my Flourish XL, which I ordered, has not arrived because the place I ordered forgot to ship it, so it is not here. So what I will be doing is I'll just be starting with the hydrogen peroxide dosing. So I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so what you're seeing here is the Riccia. I have a couple of clumps here, a couple of clumps there, and I've got some moss stones, some stones with moss wrapped around it, in a couple of spots. And before I add hydrogen peroxide, I'm going to take those things out because they are more sensitive to hydrogen peroxide, so I don't want them getting damaged. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the filter media that I have in this hang-on back filter, because hydrogen peroxide is going to harm the bacteria in there, so I don't want them to get hurt during the treatment, so I will be taking these guys out. Okay, so now I've got the hang-on back filter running dry. It's got no filtration media in it. It's just running for the sake of creating flow. So you don't have to take out the media in your filter. You can just turn off the filter and instead get water circulation by just dropping in any regular pump inside the tank to create flow. Now the reason you want flow is because hydrogen peroxide works by direct contact with any surface of the algae. So you want some water circulation so that that hydrogen peroxide is in continuous contact with the algae. So it's not necessary to have flow, but it is definitely recommended if you're doing a whole tank treatment to have some sort of flow in the aquarium prior to adding your hydrogen peroxide. Okay, so what I've got here is a bottle of hydrogen peroxide. I've purchased this at a local pharmacy. It is very cheap. I got it for less than $1 for this whole bottle. And the reason they sell this at pharmacies is because the most common use for H2O2 in a household is to clean wounds. So that's where I got it. And basically how much you can use depends on the percentage of hydrogen peroxide that is in the product that you purchased. This one happens to be 3% hydrogen peroxide. So that means I can use about 1 ml per liter of water without risking too much of collateral damage. So I have it measured out in a syringe like this. You can use squirt bottles, you can use pretty much anything to measure it out, and I will be using a syringe. So this is a 12-gallon tank, so I can use about 30 to 40 milliliters of hydrogen peroxide, the 3% hydrogen peroxide, and I will be using 30 for this tank for the whole tank treatment. And I'll be adding this straight in. Okay, so it's been a couple minutes since I've added the hydrogen peroxide. And if you look carefully, you may see some air bubbles rising, and that is because the hydrogen peroxide is reacting with the algae and the organic matter to form oxygen gas. And another thing to note about hydrogen peroxide is that they do have an expiration date. This bottle is, the expiration date is 2019. And if you have a bottle that's too old, it will be no good because the hydrogen peroxide eventually over time breaks down into oxygen and water by itself. So an old bottle will just be water in there and oxygen gas. So I will be watching this tank for a couple minutes to see if there's any acute toxicity, which there probably won't be because I have added the correct dose, I believe. And another thing I will do is I will do a water change after several hours to remove any of the excess hydrogen peroxide that hasn't reacted yet that remains in the water. And one additional thing that I will do for this week is I'll do a 3-day blackout period. That's basically when you turn off the lights for about 3 or 4 days when you have an algae issue. And what that does is, because algae is a simpler organism, it has less resistance to starvation. So if you turn off the lights, you're basically starving your algae. And complex plants like these organisms, they can store nutrients in their leaves and stems. So basically they will be more resistant to starvation compared to the simpler organisms like algae. So I will be combining that to combat the algae. And next week I will start dosing little bits of XL to facilitate the entire process. So that will be the battle against algae continuing to go on. Okay, so this is 1 day after treating with hydrogen peroxide. I've done about a 50% water change about 2 hours after the treatment. And I don't see any collateral damage that is evident. You can see a buried blue velvet shrimp there. There's a mono shrimp up there. And the ram's orange snails are doing fine. The algae has turned a bit white, so it has bleached a bit in certain areas. But in other areas, they are still looking nice and green. So we will have to see how this turns out over time. So that will be it for this week's algae treatment. I will be doing updates continuously. Thank you for watching.